Good morning, Bright City Church. Welcome this morning. I wanted to actually follow up on something Alex just said about the awkwardness of the meet and greet. We know that for some of you, especially if you're introverts, that the meet and greet time is sort of like where your soul goes to die. But Ike and I were actually talking just yesterday about being in a movie theater means that there's actually kind of this muscle memory that a lot of us have for when you go to a movie theater. You go and you sit in your seat and you're passive and you are entertained, but you are not at a movie theater in order to connect with one another. And because this space kind of has its own natural muscle memory to it, we have to actively resist that and be intentional about connecting with one another. And so for those of you who during the meet and greet, you feel really awkward and you just wish it was over, thank you so much for leaning into that time so that we as a community can resist the isolation of this space. But again, if you are new to Bright City, welcome. My name is Sharon. I am one of the pastors here at Bright City Church, where we exist to help you take your next step towards Christ. And so however you came here this morning, if you've been out of church for a while or you are a Sunday morning church goer, our question for you is exactly the same, which is, what is your next step towards Christ? And how can we partner with you in that journey? Now, if this is your first time, your first step is to simply let us know that you are here. And there's a really easy way for you to do that. If you would scan that QR code and click new here, fill that out, we will follow up with you. And then in addition to that, I will be available in the lobby immediately after the service. And so if you have any questions at all, anything that you would like to know, or if you'd just like to meet me and talk to me or get to know more about me and my husband, Ike, we would love to talk with you after the service as well. Now, if you consider Bright City Church your home, maybe your next step is to give. We talk about giving as an aspect of the worship life of our church. It's how we tangibly demonstrate the priority of God in our lives. And so if you are not yet taking that step, you can either scan the QR code or you can go to brightcitychurch.com/give to set up automatic monthly giving. And then a final way that you can sort of take that next step, especially if you do consider Bright City Church your home, is to serve. We become more like Jesus when we serve one another. And so if you consider this your church home, but you are not yet participating in our church that way, just scan that QR code and click serve. And then as always, you can get all the announcements. There's many, many more that I'm not going to be able to cover this morning by signing up for our weekly newsletter. But in terms of announcements for this week, one is that some of you remember last Sunday we had our small group fair. It went really, really well, but you have until September 27th to sign up for a small group. And so if you're currently not in a small group, or if you are in a small group, but it's maybe not quite the right fit, we want you to be in a small group that is the right fit. And so scan that QR code. If you're still looking for a small group, you have until September 27th for this fall chapter of the small groups. And then next Sunday, does anyone know what next Sunday is? Anyone? Yes. So next Sunday, we are celebrating the 5th anniversary of Bright City Church. Yes, let's get a round of applause for that. This is a pretty big deal. We're really excited to celebrate 5 years. I mean, anytime a church plant survives, period, it's honestly a big reason to praise God, but especially because a lot of you know we planted right before the pandemic. And so a lot of churches did not survive the pandemic. And so the fact that we are still here is just such a testimony to the faithfulness of God. And so we are really excited to celebrate the last 5 years of Bright City and to just worship and praise Jesus next Sunday. We're going to have a reception in the lobby. We're going to have some fun surprises. You're going to hear some testimonies from people as well. And so just make a mental note to be here next Sunday as we celebrate 5 years of Bright City Church. And then the final announcement, I'm actually going to need my phone to make sure I get all the details, but we have what is called a Good Neighbor team. It's associated with World Relief, which helps to settle refugees in this area. And so if you are interested in either being a part of that Good Neighbor team, or if you just want to be someone who's kind of on call, like if someone needs to be picked up at at the airport, or if somebody needs just something that is just kind of a one-off sort of a thing, and you would like to be on hand to help settle refugees in this area, we have a training coming up on October 7th. It'll be that morning from 10:15 a.m. to 12:15 at the church offices. And again, this isn't necessarily a giant commitment that you have to be making. Some of you really want to be plugged in. Some of you can't make that kind of commitment. But in order to do anything at all, you actually have to go through the training. And so if you're interested in that, just scan the QR code as well. So that is all for me. And so I'm going to welcome up Erica for our scripture reading.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Erica Bleasel. I am part of the liturgy team here at Bright City. We're going to read scripture together. If you feel able, please rise for the reading of God's word. Our passage today is from the 5th chapter of John, verses 1-9. After this, a Jewish festival took place, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. By the sheep gate in Jerusalem, there is a pool called Bethesda in Aramaic, which has 5 colonnades. Within these lay a large number of disabled, blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man was there who had been disabled for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and realized he had already been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to get well?" "Sir," the disabled man answered, "I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. But while I'm coming, someone goes down ahead of me." "Get up," Jesus told him. "Pick up your mat and walk." Instantly, the man got well, picked up his mat, and started to walk. This is the word of the Lord.
You guys can be seated. Thank you, Erica. Well, before we get into the message this morning, I wanted to just punctuate the 5-year anniversary next week and just how excited we are to celebrate that as a church. I was telling the last service that, when you make it to 5 years as a church, you think back to before you planted and you're just like, I just hope we're still here at 5 years. And so that God has been so faithful to us, we really want to celebrate that. I told our team this week too, I was kind of like, we've celebrated every birthday anniversary kind of to this point. But after 5 years, it starts to get a little weird. Like 6 years, thank goodness we're still here, And so we'll probably celebrate at 10, 15, all that kind of stuff, but really excited for us to celebrate this year and to share some testimonies. For those that are interested in this kind of thing, there is some Bright City swag that we're going to share and some fun stuff like that. So it's going to be a really fun weekend. So make sure you can be a part of that. Well, this morning we are coming to the end of our series, Good Baggage, How Our Difficult Childhoods Prepared Us for Healthy Relationships. And I wanted to start just by saying that one of the things that motivated me to write on this in Good Baggage, which comes out Tuesday, so excited that is almost here, but one of the reasons I wrote on the impact of our childhoods on our relationships as adults was how prevalent some of these difficult childhood experiences are. They are much to the opposite of what kind of I grew up thinking, which is, I'm the exception, this is rare, everybody else's experience is different. Coming to learn that my experience was quite common, actually. And as I did research to prepare for this, one of the things that I learned was that according to the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, 1 in 5 current American adults grew up in a home with an alcoholic relative. A report in 1998, which would have been for some of us, many of us, maybe a season where we were in childhood or adolescence. This report in 1998 estimated that more than 50% of families had some form of dysfunction. What they meant by that was that the family was preoccupied with one or more of the following, which would be alcohol and drug addiction, workaholism, rigid religiosity, say that 5 times fast, chronic physical and mental illness, codependency, child abuse, or sexual acting out. And so kind of doing this work, coming to understand and knowing that this impacts many of us in the room, I kind of wanted to end our series by asking the question of where do we go from here? recognizing that the end of this series is not the end of this work. Maybe this work is just beginning for you. Maybe this series has made you aware of some work that you need to begin doing. Or maybe throughout this series you've been sitting and listening, but you've been resistant to the thought of doing this kind of work. And so this morning I want to ask you a question that Jesus asks a man about his physical pain, but I want to ask you about your relational pain, which is this: do you want to be well? When we read this in the story, it seems like a pretty simple question, like, yes, of course, obviously I want to be well. But there are 4 things that this man does in this story that we also do that often prevents our healing. This story that Erica read for us this morning, the story of this man who had been disabled for 38 years and had been living by this pool for a long time. We're not told exactly how long, but maybe decades, had been living by this pool. And the superstition around this pool, just to give you some background, there was this idea that once in a while an angel would come down and stir these waters. And if you were the first into the water after the angel stirred the waters, then you would be healed. And so when Jesus sees this man walking through, he sees this man and he asks him, do you want to be well? That's why he responds this way in verse 7. Sir, the disabled man answered, I have no one to put me in the pool when the water is stirring up. But while I'm coming, someone goes down ahead of me. This one short phrase, there are 4 things in this that I think we also do that ultimately can prevent our healing. The first thing that he does here that I want to point out to you is he assumes that he knows what he needs. And one of the things that prevents our healing is that we assume we know what we need. This man is convinced that his healing is about the water and how he can get into it first. There seems no imagination that his healing could be about or from anything else. And so I want to ask you a question this morning. I want you to be honest with yourself. How many of us have ever sort of self-diagnosed ourselves before going to the doctor? Self-diagnosed ourselves and got it completely wrong. I'm pretty sure all of us sometime in our life have misdiagnosed ourselves with some terminal illness at least once, thanks to WebMD. I have all the symptoms of this terminal illness. Several years ago, I had this pain sort of in the middle of my abdomen. And I think by the time that I actually went to the doctor, I was convinced that I had stomach cancer. Like, that's the point we were at, right? You just kind of go to worst case scenario. And so I go to the doctor, and he kind of checks things out, and then he pauses after kind of doing this, assessment of things. He pauses, and he says, how do you feel about going to a chiropractor? I'm like, what does this have to do with a chiropractor? Like, I've got pain in my stomach. What are you talking about? And it turns out I had my left rib cage was kind of locked up from a fall a couple of years before, and the way that it was locked up was creating pressure on my abdomen in a way that was causing some pain. And so I go to the chiropractor, and they do their adjustment thing, and I am better. The pain is relieved. And there were 2 things that I learned from this experience. The first thing was I was way off in what I thought I needed, right? Like, completely wrong about it. And so I want to say, if we do this where we misdiagnose our physical health, we have to wonder why we would assume that when it comes to our mental, emotional, and relational and spiritual health, why it would be any different. Why would we assume that we just instinctively know what we need? This man thought he needed to get in this water. He was convinced that this is what he needed. And so we resist the insight, the opinions, the perspective of others who may be more informed. The second thing that I learned from this is that sometimes healing has to come from places we aren't comfortable with. When he asked if how I felt about going to see a chiropractor, I had never at that point been to see a chiropractor. And quite honestly, I recognize it is important work, but I make fun of Sharon for going to the chiropractor. I joke with her that it's voodoo doctor work, just to rib her. I realize I'm saying if you're a chiropractor, it is legitimate, don't get me wrong. But I can't make fun of her anymore if I go, right? And so I wasn't fully comfortable with this. And this man, he was Even though he had never gotten into the water, he was convinced that this is where his healing would come from. Here's what this man needed in order to be made well. And the reason that matters for you and I is I think if we are really honest with ourselves, we all have our own version of the healing pool. The thing that we find ourselves running to over and over again because it's comfortable, it's familiar. Even though it's never actually healed us, even though it's never actually sustained healing for us, we run to it over and over again, and it may be time that we take seriously the fact that it cannot offer what we believe it will offer us. Maybe it's time that we seriously consider seeking healing somewhere where we're not comfortable. Maybe it means we need to take the time and be willing to seek out a professional. For some of us, it may be time that we finally just surrender that Jesus is the source of healing that we need. Maybe we've been trying to do this on our own and resist that Jesus can bring us some kind of healing, but we have come to the end of ourselves, and it is time for us to surrender that Jesus is the source of healing that we need. The second thing that we see this man do is he evades the key question, do you want to be well? Because this man assumes that he knows what he needs, because he assumes that his healing is about the water, he doesn't answer the question that Jesus is asking. Jesus asks, do you want to be well? And the question that he answers is, why can't you get in the water? Or why hasn't the water healed you yet? Neither of which is the question that Jesus is asking. Jesus asked if he wanted to be well. And I think when it comes to our relational challenges and the pain that we carry, I think we all have our questions that we prefer to answer. Questions like, whose fault is it that I'm not well? Why can't we get well? Why nothing out there can help us, or why it's just impossible for us to get well. Several years ago, I had my own moment of evading sort of the key question of, do you want to be well? It was sort of a low point for me as a father. It was one of those moments where you look back on and you just kind of cringe, kind of like, Sharon had been out of town, and I had been with the kids for several days, and the kids were kind of in that stage of just constantly bickering and picking on one another and arguing about whose toy was whose and whose turn it was to pick the song in the car and who picked the last song in the car, and one of the child screaming at the top of their lungs, be quiet, because the other two are being too loud, which obviously makes things better when they start screaming, be quiet. They were, talking about so-and-so called me such and such, and finally, we're getting towards bedtime, and I am about at the end of myself, and one of my sons loses his ever-living mind because his sister has his Lego. And I'm just done. And so in this moment, I yelled in my loudest, harshest, angriest voice, get in your bed now! And in that moment, I saw the fear come across his face. He immediately burst into tears, ran and dove headfirst into his pillow, and I just deflated. I deflated because as I thought to myself, here I am doing exactly what my dad did. That in the moment where it mattered most, I did exactly the thing I'd been trying and working so hard to do differently. And so if Jesus had asked me in that moment if I wanted to be well, I might have said something like, it's just not possible. But Jesus didn't ask if it was possible for me to be well. I might have said, it's no use, it's too late, I'm too much like my dad. But Jesus didn't ask if it was too late to be healed. And so this morning, I'm not asking you, why aren't you well? I'm not asking, whose fault is it that you aren't well? I'm not asking, is it possible for you to be well, or what are the obstacles to you being well, or is it too late for you to be healed? I'm starting where Jesus started, which is, do you want to be well? The Greek word that Jesus uses here when he says, do you want to be well, is the same word that is often used to speak of someone's will, like the will of God. And what Jesus is doing here is asking the very piercing question that if all of the obstacles were removed, would you will it that you would be made well? Would you honestly will it that you be made well? And I want to be clear, this is not a judgmental question. This is the honest, self-reflective question that we all need to ask ourselves. Do I really want to be well, or do I prefer the comfort and the familiarity of my chosen healing pool that never really heals, but I keep running to it anyway because it's comfortable? Do you really want to be well, or are you too afraid of asking for help? Do you really want to be well, or are you too afraid of bringing up the past? Do you really want to be well, or are you too afraid of acknowledging that you've got some stuff? Do you really want to be well? The third thing that we see this man do in the story is he shifts the blame. And we too prevent our own healing when we shift the blame. Kind of assumes it's everyone else's fault, that there's no one here to put him in the water. Who do we blame for why we can't get well? One of the more common ways that we do this without really even being aware of it, and I want to be careful how I say this, but one of the ways that we can shift the blame is we take something where someone has hurt us and we refuse to seek care and help because someone else was the cause of the pain. And so why should we have to be the one that has to go to therapy or to counseling? And what we don't think about is in that moment, what we are assuming or what we're suggesting is that therapy is punishment. And if someone else was the cause of our pain, why should we be punished for it? And the outcome of this, the unfortunate side of this, is that we just end up punishing ourselves because we allow the pain of past relationships to now inflict pain in our future relationships. And yes, we unfortunately can't change what happened to us, but we can change how they impact our future relationships. Some of you know that a part of my story was developing an unhealthy relationship with my anxiety medication. It wasn't an addiction, it wasn't dependence, but was beginning to take more of it than I should. And when we were meeting with our counselor during this time, our counselor said, "You're starting to display some addictive behavior." And I remember in that moment having the initial thought of, no, I'm not. I'm totally in control. I'm totally fine. And then my next thought was, well, maybe, but it's not my fault. I'm in pain because of what someone else has done. And so why am I the one who has to do this work? But then I came to the third thought, the thought that I want to impress upon you all this morning, which is, yes, it may have been someone else's fault. Yes, I may be getting to demonstrate these tendencies, but if I don't do something about it, I'm the one who will suffer because of it. And I will perpetuate many of the cycles that I have wanted so badly to end. And so though I may not be a cause of some of the pain that I experienced, if I don't do the work to heal it, then I will suffer more because of it. So he shifts the blame, and then along with that, he does the fourth thing, which is overindulging in self-pity. He says, no one here is able to help me into the water, or no one helps me into the water, or someone goes in ahead of me. And I want to be clear, there is a time and a place to console ourselves. There's a time and a place to express compassion for ourselves and our situation, to grieve and to even express pity for ourselves, to have our pity parties. But one person wrote this, they said, it's okay to sit on your pity pot, just remember to flush. That at some point it has to end. At some point we have to move beyond that. And with this man, in either case, the fault is with other people. Either there's no one to help him, or other people get there first. And oftentimes our perceived obstacles to wellness are other people. That if other people just cared about me, or if other people just weren't so self-focused, If other people could get their junk together, then I could be well. And as I read this story and, yes, have compassion for what this man has been through and what he has experienced, and recognizing that this is not something that he brought on himself, and yet knowing that he's been here for a long time, maybe decades, it's also hard for me to accept that at no point in that time was it possible for him to be the first one into the water. And so the reason that this overindulging in self-pity can get in the way of our healing is that it ultimately robs us of our sense of responsibility in our own healing. It robs us of the sense that we have a part to play in our own healing. And so ultimately, this leads to harming ourselves because we never pursue the healing we need. What's interesting about this story is that if you read it closely, Jesus doesn't really express any compassion or sympathy for this man. He doesn't coddle him. There's no moment of, oh, I'm so sorry that you've been through this. This must be really hard. There's none of that. Jesus seems to do something more important. And picking up in verse 8, this is what Jesus says. It says, "Get up," Jesus told him, "pick up your mat and walk." Instantly the man got well, picked up his mat, and started to walk. Jesus tells the man, "Get up, pick up your mat, and walk." He doesn't say, "Be made well." He doesn't say, "Just believe in me and you will be healed." He tells him to get up. There's been nothing that suggests to us that he would think trying to get up would be any different from every time he's tried to get up before. But Jesus tells him to get up. And I think what Jesus is doing in this moment is he is inviting this man to actively participate in his own healing. And some of you here, I know this morning, you have been doing the hard, grueling, ongoing work of participating in your own healing, of fighting for your own healing. But I also know that there are some of us who are waiting for someone else to put us in the water. And so the reason we aren't healed is because no one else is willing to put us in the water. Nobody has put us in the water. And it's time for some of you to get up and to take your mat and to walk. Maybe you're waiting on Jesus to put you in the water. I'm waiting for Jesus, just fix it. Just fix me, Jesus. And Jesus is inviting you. He's doing the same thing that he's doing with this man. He's inviting you to participate in your own healing, to get up, to take your mat, and to walk. Why would Jesus do this? Why would Jesus do this? Jesus does this in part, I believe, because our healing journeys are more than just about our physical or emotional healing. Our healing journeys also teach us things that we could not learn any other way. This man learned something that would transcend his paralysis. That his healing wasn't ultimately about the water and how he could get into it first. And this was a truth that was more than just healing his disability. This is what would be required for understanding where the healing for his soul would come from as well. It wasn't about the water. It was about what Jesus was going to do in him. But he had trusted this superstition of this pool for decades before he came to learn this lesson. And some of the most important lessons are also the hardest for us to learn. What is the lesson your journey to healing is trying to teach you? And what is it going to take for you to learn that lesson? I end this series and end the book with this story because there's something about this story that reminds me of the idea of how we recover from our difficult childhoods and our painful relationships. That with this man, we pick up our baggage and walk. We don't give up because of it. We are not paralyzed by it. We pick it up and we walk. And like this man, miraculous things begin to happen as we take those steps. It's not instantaneous healing. It's not immediate healing. But as we take steps to heal, it will be amazing the way God works in and alongside of that to bring healing for us. And so as we bring this series to a close, if you take nothing else from this series, I want you to know that bad relationships in your childhood do not predestine you to bad relationships yourself. That the health of our relationships does not depend on where we are starting from. It depends on how hard we are willing to work on them. That what was counterintuitive about the resurrection is the same thing that is counterintuitive about our stories of healing. Which is in the resurrection, Jesus' greatest moment of defeat, his moment of pain, his greatest moment of loss becomes his greatest opportunity. And for many of us, these moments of our greatest pain become our greatest opportunity. Ernest Hemingway wrote this. He said, "The world breaks everyone, and afterward many are strong at the broken places." A powerful, powerful image of what redemption of our stories can look like. And so my desire for this is not only to be inspirational and motivational and practical, it is also, I want you to be illumined to one of the most powerful parts of following Jesus, which is the transformational, hopeful perspective it can give us on our pain. Because when it came to the resurrection, what made the resurrection so powerful is the fact that it is not what happens to dead people. Dead people stay dead. And when it comes to relational baggage, broken people stay broken. Or at least that is what we were told. But the good news is God's Spirit gave us the same thing it gave Jesus in the resurrection, which was the power to do something that humanity doesn't have the power on its own to do. And so this series isn't only an invitation to reverse the impacts of our childhood. It's an invitation to experience God's powerful healing and transforming work in us. Do you want to be well? This morning, I want to give you an opportunity to respond to this invitation. I want to invite you to close your eyes, to bow your heads, and to just bring whatever pain, whatever hurt, whatever sorrows that you're carrying, to bring those to Jesus. Jesus, we thank you that you understand. You understand the pain of suffering loss, the pain of betrayal, the pain of broken relationships. God, you know them. And so when we come before you this morning, Jesus, we are not bringing anything that is foreign to you. It's something that you know intimately, that you know fully, and that you gave your life in order to see healed. And so as we close this out this morning, close out this series, we just want to bring it to you saying, Jesus, we want to do whatever is necessary to be healed. Whatever humility is involved, whatever surrender is involved, Jesus, we just want to do that this morning. We want to surrender it to you. We ask you, Jesus, to do the work that only you can do, to begin the work of healing in us, and that we would come alongside of you, and that we would participate in our own healing. Jesus, would you heal us?